Good evening, everyone. I want to thank everyone for attending tonight's webinar on the topic of Unmasked, the impact of domestic violence on Black women. My name is Kenesha Jones. I am the first vice president of the Central Jersey Club of the National Association of Negro Business and Professional Women's Club, Incorporated. Before we begin, I want to recognize a few of the guests that we have on the call. We are so thrilled that our past national president is on the call, Mrs. Piola Smith-Smith. We also have our current national youth leader, Ms. Andrea Stokes, on the call. And finally, we have our club president, Ms. Elise Franklin Owens. A few housekeeping tips: please keep your phones on mute and your computers on mute. Unless you have a question, you can raise your hand and then we will select you and then you can speak. Also, if you have any questions, feel free to use the chat feature at the bottom of the screen, and you can type in your questions, and we will acknowledge them and give them to our presenters tonight. In the interest of confidentiality, please, if you're going to ask a question and it relates to someone you know, please try to avoid using names or any information that can be an identifier to protect the confidentiality of the people involved. So without any further delays, I'm going to throw this program over to Alicia Johnson, who is our wonderful chairperson for tonight's event. She will provide a bio for our two presenters. So take it away, Alicia.
Good evening, everyone. Adrienne Simpkins. She's a licensed professional counselor. She currently works as the outreach and capacity building coordinator at the New Jersey Coalition to End Domestic Violence. She is also the co-chair of the Women of Color Task Force. Hilda Massenberg, she holds a master's degree in social work with a certificate in violence against women and children. She is also the co-chair of the Women of Color Task Force. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to Adrienne Simpkins.
Good evening, everyone. It's an honor to be here with you. As Alicia said, Adrienne Simpkins with the New Jersey Coalition to End Domestic Violence, presenting alongside my co-chair, Hilda Massenberg, and we are here to talk to you about the impact of domestic violence of Black women. We'll go over some things with you in the beginning of our presentation, but I'll turn it over to Hilda for right now.
We wear the mask that grins and lies. It hides our cheeks and shades our eyes. This debt we pay to human guile. With torn and bleeding hearts, we smile and our mouths with mirrored subtleties. Why should the world be overwise in counting all our tears and sighs? Nay, let them only see us while we wear the mask. We smile, but oh, great Christ, our cries to thee from tortured souls arise. We sing, but oh, the clay is vile beneath our feet and long the mile. But let the world dream otherwise. We wear the mask. Good evening, everyone. Tonight, we are talking to you about Unmasked. We're going to take our mask off tonight, and we're going to talk about the impact of domestic violence on Black women. This is a safe place to discuss domestic violence and its effects. Please keep in mind that there is diversity in our experiences and opinions. Let us be respectful of one another's contributions to the discussion. It takes courage to be vulnerable. I am taking off my mask.
So in that same vein, I just want to encourage everyone to just be mindful of what you need to take care of yourself during this presentation. We recognize that domestic violence impacts all of us. And so there may be someone present who has survived domestic violence. There may be someone who knows someone who's experienced domestic violence, and we just want to be sensitive to that and just ask that whatever you need during this presentation, if that means turning your camera off, if it means getting up to move around and going to take a drink of water, that's certainly welcome. So please feel free to excuse yourself if you need to, cry if you need to, ask questions if you need to. If you need support after the presentation, we can certainly provide resources for that as well.
Some statistics on domestic violence, and as Adrian stated, it can affect anyone. 1 in 4 women will experience domestic violence, as well as 1 in 7 men. Women from the ages from 18 to 34 are at the greatest risk of becoming domestic violence victims. In the state of New Jersey, 63,420 reported domestic violence offenses, 52 homicides. And remember, these are not all the violences that have been committed against women. This is just the ones that have been reported. And this is from our 2016 New Jersey State Police Domestic Violence Report. Just to add on a couple comments to that, African American women were victimized at alarmingly higher rates at 1.8 per 100,000. Hispanic women were victims at a rate of 1 per 100,000. White women were victims at a rate of 0.6 per 100,000. The homicide rate for African American women is higher because it has been reported that African American women fight back. In Monmouth and Ocean County, there were 3,798 domestic violence offenses, again, reported. 3 homicides, 3,223 assaults, 238 terroristic threats, 24 sexual assaults, 3,866 harassment, 36 stalkings. County total is 8,162. The total arrests that were made were 2,655. When we talk about terroristic threats, that means that they were stalking them and they were, telling them that they're going to kill them and do different things that a terrorist would do to a victim or anyone that they're trying to harm.
Something else of note as I'm thinking about the stats is that reports versus arrests, if you notice that there's a difference, right? Just because an incident is reported doesn't mean that that an arrest is made, and it also doesn't mean that charges are brought forth. So sometimes these things happen and there's no accountability and nothing is done in regards to the offenses that were committed.
1,230 victims were served in one day. This was a report that was done throughout the 8 different agencies where 521 adults and child victims of domestic violence, they found refuge in emergency shelters, transitional housing, or other housings provided by local domestic violence programs. 709 adult and child victims received non-residential assistance and services, including counseling, legal advocacy, children's support groups, and more. The statistics below show that the types of services that were provided on a specific day: court accompaniment, 73%. That means that somebody went to court with a legal advocate or somebody appointed to them by the courts. Support advocacy related to public benefits, TANF and welfare, that's through the Board of Social Services. Different agencies that are supported by the public, different forums that they have: transportation, 63%, therapy, counseling for adults by a licensed practitioner, childcare and daycare. Oftentimes, the victims go to the Board of Social Services for these resources and for this help. but it's not always readily available for women of color. We are not often afforded those services as it would be for people that are not of color. So we have a lot of different things that we have to, hoops that we have to jump through in order for us to get these services. The services are there, and oftentimes because we're women of color and because of where we come from, and you know, when you walk in and they look at you and they want to size you up and put you in a box, we're not often given those same services as women that are not of color. 571 hotline calls. Those were the number of calls that came in through a hotline. And we have people calling in for different services and trying to get assistance through a hotline that we have. 265 of those individuals attended prevention and educational training. The Board of Social Services, and if the victim has to go to see a counselor where the children are involved, they are giving a certain amount of classes that they have to attend, and they have to report back and let them know that they in fact attended these classes. Oftentimes, the victims don't want to attend the classes because of childcare, different things like that, transportation, the time that they need to get there. So it becomes a burden, so to speak, to them because they don't have the means, again, the resources to get there. 126 unmet requests for services in one day, of which 65%, 82, were for housing and emergency shelter. Oftentimes, our women need shelter, and I know I used to do FEOs, and they would say, well, they cause their own homelessness, you know, and they categorize them as being homeless, not really getting into the meat of the problem. Why are they there? Because they had no choice. They had to leave. And oftentimes, when it's time to go, you have to go when you can go, and make sure that you have a ride or somebody that's going to help you get to where you need to be.
And I want to leave this up just a little bit longer, just so that, you know, sometimes when you see stats, it makes it a little more real. And also, you know, just holding space, like Hilda said, for the fact that some of these things are underreported, and not everyone reaches out for help. And a lot of women of color, unfortunately, Black women, you know, there are so many barriers in place for us to have access to these services. So when we look at these stats, think of, you know, what's represented in just one day in New Jersey, but just think of the countless others who may not have been able to or weren't aware of services that were available for help. So what is domestic violence? Of course, we know it's more than physical violence. I think that in some circumstances, that's how folks identify it, right? That, you know, someone is physically putting their hands on you or causing you harm. However, we know that domestic violence is about a pattern of behavior that causes people to be afraid. So it's doing things that are threatening, things that cause harm, humiliate, punish, or frighten the person that you're with. Domestic violence is about power and control and that imbalance of power. So it's not about the violence itself. It's about the force behind the violence, which is power and control. It's about power and inequity. So some of the things that domestic violence is not, it's so important to draw attention to these, because the things on this slide pretty much represents like the misinformation that goes forward, like saying that the victim caused domestic violence, right? I don't know if you remember a couple of years ago, the Baltimore Ravens, I think he was a wide receiver with the Ravens, Ray Rice, and how that particular incident that became public knowledge with the video of a heinous beating just kind of went into this conversation about who was at fault. Well, what did she do to provoke him? And so I'm here to let you all know that there is nothing, right, that a person can do, male or female, that constitutes the use of physical violence against them. So no, domestic violence is not caused by a victim's behavior. It's not caused by anger. So sometimes when, you know, offender gets arrested and may be charged with an offense or a restraining order is brought up against that person, the judge will mandate this person to anger management. Well, anger management is not a suitable response because anger is not the issue. Power and control is the issue. And so when you're doing batterer's intervention, you want to be thoughtful of the fact that we are challenging a person's beliefs. We are challenging attitudes that cause them to or that influence them or cause them to cause harm to the people that they're in relationships with, be it their romantic partners, dating partner, or their children. So no, and domestic violence is not caused by anger. It's also not caused by alcohol or drugs. So sometimes, we'll hear about the angry drunk, right? The person who is only abusive when they're under the influence. Well, that's because a person's inhibitions are lowered when they're under the influence of drugs or alcohol. This isn't on the slide, but also mental health, right? Like that the person must be bipolar or, there's something wrong with this person. It's a mental health condition that causes it. Well, all people who use drugs and alcohol aren't abusive, nor are people with mental illnesses abusive. Again, it's about power and control, right? And the other behaviors that the person is using to cause harm to their partner. It's also, domestic violence also is not caused by financial struggles or stress. Yes, it's a factor, but again, not a cause. And also, domestic violence is not about a lack of control. The person is doing what they're doing to control. And so this gives a little bit of an image and more clear-cut things that you may see or hear a person who's experiencing domestic violence say that their partner is doing. So at the center, we have power and control. Y'all probably gonna be tired of me saying power and control, but just wanna emphasize, right, that that's what this is about. And so you can see within the circle all of the tactics that are used against victims. So emotional abuse, that's name calling, put downs, playing mind games, gaslighting, making a person feel guilty. I don't know if anyone's ever been in a situation, I can say that I have, where something may happen to you and that person tells you, well, that didn't happen. And they're going to great lengths to convince you that what you experienced and what you felt wasn't real. So that constitutes as emotional abuse because you start thinking to yourself, well, like, is it me? Am I crazy? When in all actuality, like what happened to you, it actually happened to you. Using isolation, separating you from friends, family, support systems, minimizing, denying, and blaming, which is kind of like an emotional abuse tactic as well, in that, like, they're blaming you. Like if my dinner just would have been hot and ready. Making light of the abuse, like I only smacked you. Not taking ultimately it's not taking responsibility for one's actions. Using the children. So we hear this a lot, especially when custody is involved, how an abusive partner or someone who's causing harm can make the other parent feel guilty. Using the children to relay messages. So rather than talking to the parent or the third party contact, putting a greater responsibility on the child than is appropriate. Threatening to take the children away, right? Like I'm not, the person who's being harmed isn't a fit parent, but the person causing harm is a better suited, better qualified parent. Using male privilege, right? Being the man of the house, the leader, the master of the castle, this says. Using economic abuse. So again, like that power differential, we know about the wage income gaps and how sometimes people who experience domestic violence may be totally financially dependent on their partner. Preventing a person from being able to work. So there's been instances where, it's mutually agreed upon that, you stay home and you take care of the children. And throughout all of that, like the other person is working on the other end, controlling finances and limiting your access and your ability to make money for yourself. Using coercion and threats is another one. So threatening your well-being, threatening the well-being of people you love and care about, and also using intimidation. So sometimes that looks like doing just enough, right? It could be getting in your face or throwing things, destroying your property. Oftentimes, survivors, if they have pets, that can be a barrier to them leaving and going to shelter, because what's going to happen to my pets? And we know that pets can provide great emotional support for people. And so those are some of the ways that people who cause harm, threaten their partner from leaving.
Just want to share a little bit of history on violence and where it all stemmed from and how it's relevant to what's going on today. Violence of women still remains one of the most pervasive forms of human rights violations worldwide. I know that you've all heard of the rule of thumb. That goes all the way back, and now everybody wants to rewrite history, and they want to take that out of the history books, stating that that wasn't something that was true and it wasn't relevant to domestic violence. However, the rule of thumb has been said to derive from the belief that English law allowed a man to beat his wife with a stick, so long as it was no thicker than his thumb. And when challenged by the feminists in 1970, it was said that this was they said it wasn't associated with domestic violence. So as we've gone through history, this goes all the way back to being enslaved. The women were viewed as property, and the men took full advantage of it, the husbands, the boyfriends, or whatever, and it became a sporting event for them. They were beat and raped by their husbands and in front of their masters. Oftentimes this was done so the man could have a sense of masculinity and empowerment. As Adrian was telling you about power and control. It's all about power and control. They can control what they do and they can stop it at any time. As she also stated, alcohol and drugs is not an excuse for it, even though they make it an excuse. Black Lives Matter. Now we're starting to see that a lot now, but our lives always mattered. And we're out there now, we're letting our voices be heard. We want them to know that we're tired of this continuously going on. Black women have a lot of power and we have a lot of control. And the criminal justice system, it's just not in our favor, because oftentimes when our Black men are arrested, we want to protect them. We want to protect them because back during slavery time and even present day, we know what's going to happen to them once they get into the criminal justice system. So what we do is we protect them. We make excuses up for the behavior that they perpetrated on us. That doesn't happen in the white communities. This is our story. In addition to that, there's so many things that we have to contend with, and it's part of our history. Even with what happened to that man being nurtured in a home where domestic violence was prevalent. So we're talking about adverse child experiences, that this is something that he has experienced and he's just continuing the cycle of abuse and perpetrating it onto his woman, his wife, his partner. All of these things are relevant to today. Even when they try and go get restraining orders, a woman of color, a Black woman, will get a restraining order and she'll get to a point where he'll say, drop the restraining order because you know what's going to happen to me if you have me locked up. And most of the time they drop them and they're not locked up anyway. As Adrian also stated, mental health issues are a part of domestic violence. You go back and you see that some of these men have mental health issues. But again, it's not an excuse for domestic violence. So we have a long history of domestic violence. And when we decide to leave, it takes us 7 times before we actually leave the abusive relationship. It takes Jewish women 11 times before they leave. So we are still continuously perpetrating a cycle of abuse. We're trying so hard not to be victims. That's why you hear people say, suffer in silence. We've suffered in silence so much that now we're taking off our masks, and we need that help. We need that support. We need our village. So when we go to one of our sisters, that we can go to them in love and they not say, girl, you need to stay. Because see, that's what we do. These are things that we don't want to do. We want to encourage. We want to help them get resources that they need. These are the things that we can do, and we never, never tell someone to leave. All the things that Adrienne outlined in the power and control wheel, you never want to tell somebody to leave because you don't know what they're leaving to go to and what's going to happen if they don't have money to take care of their families. And you want to bring them into your home, you're not only putting them in jeopardy, but you're putting yourself in jeopardy as well.
And so to add to and just continue to touch on some of the things that Hilda has raised, this slide really just focuses on some of the realities for Black women. And so I was debating, whether or not I wanted to use the picture that is present, because sometimes when you depict domestic violence, you see the person with the black eye, you see the person, that looks like they've really been beaten down. But I think it's important for us to also acknowledge that victims look like you and I, right? That by looking at me, you can't tell, right, what my lived experience is or what my current experience is. And so, I don't know, I just wanted to bring to light that picture because I wasn't sure if I wanted to, use a photo that symbolized, a Black woman or one that's really, just experienced some things. And I think about, a lot of the things that are happening in the media today. When you think about the death of Breonna Taylor, and the injustice and the injustices that happen for Black women, and how sometimes, our death and our harm doesn't get the same energy that others do. And granted, they're all important. We don't want to play oppression Olympics about who has it worse or who, than the other. But oftentimes there's silence when it comes to Black women. And so just wanted to highlight some of these realities for us, that yes, we're strong, beautiful, and proud, but I think this is also an issue that we can be honest and vulnerable about. And I think that that's what this particular image represents, right? That we can take off our cape for a little bit and just be honest about what's affecting us and the way that they affect us. And so, as mentioned previously in the presentation, Hilda brought up the stats about fatalities and near fatalities for Black women, and that it happens, I want to say, about 3 times the rate that it does white women, and also our Latina counterparts. Black women constitute for 40% of the nation's domestic violence homicides.
Adrienne, can I just touch on religion? Oftentimes.
Go ahead, that was going to be my next point.
Go ahead.
Okay. And so there's a New Jersey fatality review report. So in 2013, that report was issued, but the issues are still the same. I will share that information with Alicia and Kanisha so that you guys can review it and see some of the information that we're talking about. But domestic violence homicides happen to women between the ages of 25 and 44. And also just looking at the impact of the historical oppression that Hilda talked about and the responses that we receive to our lives and intimate partner violence. So moving on to impact of culture and religion, Ms. Hilda.
Oftentimes you'll go to churches and someone will go to their pastor or somebody in the church and let them know that they are in a domestic violence situation. Oftentimes the pastors don't know how to address this. So we're encouraging the clergy to go and take domestic violence classes so they'll be able to give them the information, provide them with the resources that they need, because oftentimes we will use religion to keep somebody in line. You know, the Bible says this and the Bible says that. But the Bible also tells a man that he's supposed to love his wife, and I'm doing this from the King James Version, as God loved the church. So that does not condone domestic violence. So when you go to someone in the church, you have to be very careful who you talk to, because somebody might know your abuser. They could be linked to that person. And you never go to the pastor and he says, well, let's sit down and talk about this together. If he or she suggests that, don't do it. Because now you have told the pastor that this is what's going on in your house, which will lead to further beatings or abuse that you already are receiving from this person, and you don't want to keep that going on. So hopefully that you'll have someone in your congregations or in your mosques, or you can talk to somebody that can talk to you about what it is that your faith can help you with in trying times like this. The Women of Color Task Force, we had a workshops a couple years ago where we had an imam, we had a priest, we had a rabbi, we had all faith-based religions there to discuss domestic violence and how the churches can help women move through this.
Yes, and so survivors can be, given different faith practices that sometimes, like leaving a relationship, especially if it's a marriage, right? It can be deemed as sinful. And really, like, a person feels like compromised in their faith, right, for wanting to leave a situation that harms them, but feeling that it's morally or wrong within their faith practice. Um, and so that's why Hilda said, like, it's really important for us, right, to provide those moments of education. That pastoral counseling is great and wonderful, but sometimes, like, that doesn't hold the person who's causing the harm accountable. And sometimes that there is information, right, that is needed to help a person to remain safe within that relationship and that marriage, or respecting that sometimes the couple needs to separate and have their individual counseling before trying to do any type of couples or marital counseling, because that can cause more harm to a person. And I think that, a lot, not I think, but I know that when dealing with domestic violence, like we're also like kind of battling like our cultural norms, right? And what's normal for us, and how, when we have problems, like, we don't talk about it, right? We either sweep it under the rug, or, we don't put our family business in the street. We don't air our dirty laundry. And sometimes that can be a hindrance from seeking the services that are needed for domestic violence. And nobody wants to feel like that shame, that isolation, that rejection, and the judgment that can come with that. And so that's why it's important for us to have conversations like the ones that we're having tonight, so that we understand that domestic violence is a complex beast. It is so difficult, because, like, you love that person, right? I don't think that we go into relationships expecting to be harmed, but we know that those things happen, and it can be very complicated. And so you love the person, you want to protect them, what's best for them. I mean, you want what's best for them. but you also don't want to be harmed. And sometimes it can be difficult within our own communities to go and seek out that help. You think about misogyny, right? And how it shows up in media. You know, how Black women are portrayed. So if you're using, you know, certain shows or certain music that we listen to, that this is the picture of what Black women is, that can have very negative impacts on us because we all don't present that way. Black women are a monolith. We are we are everything. We have the ability to be everything and have multiple interests and promote in different ways or from different backgrounds, you know, different ethnicities, even within our Blackness. And so it's just important to have those things recognized when we're turning for help, and just having the support of our families and our communities. Thinking about systemic racism and inequity, Hilda, you know, did a great job of touching on these points, and just recognizing the barriers that exist within systems. And this is at the forefront, right, with our political landscape in the coming election, and how the things that are being advocated for, that have been advocated for I'll say the last 70 years, 60, 70 years with the civil rights movement, like still these things are still in existence. So you think about redlining, that still has its impact today. You think about like going to the Board of Social Services and how certain paperwork is required. And if you don't have that paperwork, or say you don't have a certain credit score that was impacted because you're in a domestic violence relationship, you have limited access to housing, right? And sometimes if you live with your family and the abuser knows where you live and you're trying to flee and you're looking for somewhere safe to go, well, they may tell you you're not homeless, right? Because you have a safe place to go, you're with your family, not knowing that, well, the person who's hurting me knows where my family lives. And so sometimes not having that cultural understanding, and not being sensitive to how we are a communal people, that sometimes that unfortunately creates more barriers because of the way that policies, practices, and laws are written, and the requirements sometimes, like, our situations don't fit within that box, or we don't show up the way that they expect us to. Inaccessibility and lack of cultural responsiveness in DV services. Again, hair products, like sometimes we just don't have access to the things that we need and the things that will cause us to feel comfortable in a domestic violence program. I can tell you that in most of the programs, a lot of the program staff are white. So if I walk in as a Black woman, my comfort level may not be, I may not be the most comfortable in a space where I don't see myself on the artwork in the wall, I don't see myself in the brochures, and I don't see myself in the person that I'm sitting across from me. And so representation, as we know, is so important, even in the services that are provided to us, even with the need for like Black therapists and mental health providers, that representation matters, because it feels good to be seen, and heard and understood by someone who may share a similar experience to you. Is there anything you wanted to add?
Oh, you touched on all of it.
Okay. Financial abuse is present in 99% of all domestic violence cases. That can also look very different for Black women, given that there are gaps in education, gaps in employment opportunities. And again, this isn't the same for all Black women, but just looking at the Fatality Review Report and other research about the impact of domestic violence on the African American community, it highlights how not having access to the things that are needed is a barrier to having access to safe housing and safety. Black women also take care of the household where Black men may not be able to find employment. So when you think about racism and discrimination and how that shows up in workspaces, thinking of incarceration of Black folks and how difficult it can be. You make a mistake earlier in your life, how difficult it can be to find work. And sometimes that weight falls on Black women to be able to take care of their households and their children. Um, needing to have access to childcare, needing access to adequate transportation. I don't know what transportation is like in Ocean and Monmouth, but I can tell you where I'm from in Burlington County, the buses are few and far in between. And we're probably one of the larger counties in the state. And where programs are located, sometimes we just can't get there without a car. And so even though Uber and Lyft is great, it's also difficult to, that can be expensive. Be expensive as well. And so that also serves as a barrier, like what other supports are needed to provide access to services. And lastly, the criminal legal system response, Hilda touched on that as well, that we, are protecting our community. We fight back, and when we do, we're arrested at disproportionate rates to our white counterparts. And so sometimes that being arrested can be a fear of engaging child protective services. So I'm not sure if you all are aware, but if there's an incident of domestic violence at the home and the police are called, it's an automatic call to DCPMP. And that may not mean the removal of your children, but it means that they're going to, come and do an investigation. And oftentimes you don't want the presence of that particular resource in your home or in your life, because it, might uncover other things, or it just makes it really challenging. And again, Black women are 3 times as likely to be involved in child protective systems than their white counterparts. I feel like we said that so many times during this presentation, right? How much harm or how much injustice is done to us at larger rates than our other counterparts.
And once they call the police to come out, if you fight back and there is a mark on him and you have no marks, they're going to arrest you. So you have to be careful when you fight back, and we can teach you how to fight back without getting arrested. Use some Pam and some hairspray and things like that. You don't want to be in the kitchen, and you don't want to be in the bathroom, because you want to get out safe. So we can teach you about that, and if you want to talk about that offline, I'll be glad to show you some tips.
Yeah,
Safety first.
Yeah, I think we're almost done. But this, like, we really could expound on this, and yeah, we could really go deep into all of these things. So please know that we're just scratching the surface, and this information is not like the end. It really is just the beginning of how this issue affects us, and it's so deep, and it goes way back historically, like Hilda said, to just the way that violence was perpetuated against Black women, with the transatlantic slave trade. And so now is the time for your engagement. This is a call to action. We want survivors to know that we see them and we believe them. If you're a survivor on this call, I see you and I believe you. And so as a community, what do you think are things we can do? And please feel free to use the chat function for this. What we can do to help survivors of domestic violence, just giving consideration to everything you heard this evening.
I think one of the things that we can do, and it would be more or less by being proactive, and that is making sure that we tell our children, our daughters and our sons, how to treat one another, how a woman is supposed to treat a man and how a man is to treat a woman, and show by, we can't always do it by example, but we know what we've gone through and we know what other people are going through, and we can tell them so that they're more alert and aware, and that they don't have to be like their father or do what their mother did, that they know, they have an understanding of what it is, way they should, things they should do and things they should not let be done to them.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things that the Women of Color Task Force, we're working on getting together a mentoring program where we can mentor our young women and our young men, not wait, as you stated, until they become us. And then now we want to educate them on how to treat somebody. I've gone to court with many women, and one of the biggest things, their complaints were that they wish the abuser would have beat them instead of mentally and verbally abusing them, because they were saying that they can deal with the pain and they can deal with the fact that they can heal from it, but you can't take back something that somebody has said. So thank you very much, and we will definitely put that on our calendar and move it forward, because we've been talking about it and now we need to do something about it. Thank you.
I have a question. What can we do as a community, as an organization, to help victims, especially in this time of COVID? They're in the house with that person every day. Is there anything basically we can do to assist, to help them in this situation at this time? Any suggestions?
I think it's important to, ask a person what it is that they need, right? Because it's about, right, it's also about safety for the person who's being harmed and also safety for yourself. And so asking in what way you can provide support. And sometimes that's listening. Sometimes it's connecting them to the resource that they may need, and sharing with them safe ways that they can access. So we're going to share like some numbers for support that they may be able to text if it's not safe to call. Maybe safety planning with them, right? Talking with them about, do they want to leave, right? Because we also don't want to assume that they want to leave the situation either. So I think
Right.
it's always important to ask that person what they need, and how you can best be of assistance to them. And then just knowing what resources are available, for them to reach out for, say, safe shelter or for counseling or whatever it is that they may need. The Board of Social Services. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
That's a good starting place. I hope that answers your question.
It does. It does. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I find today that too many young women seem to feel that they need to have a partner to fulfill themselves. And I think sometimes they find themselves in abusive situations without even realizing it. I wonder, how often do you all go into areas with younger women on the college circuit perhaps, or at high schools, because there are a lot of kids who are in abusive situations with boyfriends.
Mm-hmm.
And are you able to go into the schools to bring a presentation like this?
We certainly can. However, most programs that are in the state of New Jersey, like if they have a prevention person, So like each county in New Jersey has a domestic violence program.
Mhm.
And I believe in the state there's a mandate that they have to teach on teen dating violence. And so for that, sometimes they'll reach out to the local programs to come
Mhm.
into school and do like teen dating violence education.
Mhm.
I feel like it needs to be more than a class. Like it just needs to be ingrained in everything.
Yeah,
So I
yeah, yeah.
wish that there was a more comprehensive curriculum that existed where we're talking about this all the time, right?
I
Like that.
think there's so many
Like,
young women who are settling. You know, they're settling
right.
because they have someone on their arm, and these people aren't really good for them.
Mhm.
And they're afraid. They're getting older, and they're afraid that they're going to be alone. And I think a lot of our Black women need to understand that you can be your best friend.
Yeah.
And you know, you don't have to have a man on your hip, or especially if they're sometimes just mentally abusive, psychologically abusive, and you don't even realize it.
Mhm.
We have two organizations that we work with, and they are both on our task force. Harambe is a social agency, service agency down in Sicklerville. Rose Williams, she does a lot of that. She goes out, and Tamu Lane from Healing Wounds, they go out a lot of times to the schools and talk to the, and you know, another thing too, we have to be invited, because a lot of them don't want us in there, because you have parents who don't want you talking to their children
That's
about
true.
domestic violence. So we have to, and how I get in, I usually go through somebody in the school, maybe one of the principals or teachers that I know personally, that will ask me to come in and do a presentation. So that's how we do it. And not only that, but a lot of the churches are starting to engage in these conversations.
Well,
And
that's good.
again, I know Adrian has done a presentation with another organization. It's the American Baptist Association. She did one for them, and I did one as well on different topics surrounding domestic violence. And as I stated, you have Harambe Social Service Agency, and these are women that look like us.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the other thing, because when I was in one of the outreach offices in Camden, I was the only Black case manager down there, and they would send me to all the schools, the Black schools in Camden. And when I got there, the kids were like, well, where have you been? Because everybody else in the office were white, so they couldn't identify with those students. So yes, we do have people that are capable of going into the schools if we are invited. Every year, Lawnside invites us to come in and talk to their students. And the National Hookup of Black Women also go into the schools and do this as well. So you have those three people, you know, three entities that I shared with you, and they will be happy. Rose will be happy to go in, and Tamu as well, because Tamu does a lot on healing and things of that nature, and she will bring to you her experience. So those are, you know, resources that are available to you.
And I'm glad you added the part about the pastors, because oftentimes they are abusers.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I had to, oh, never mind. Okay. Well, I thank God for my pastor, because when I go in there and I said, listen, this is what we need to do. So our leadership team, if you walk into our church and somebody has this black circle in their hand, they'll know what it is.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, this was a great presentation.
Thank you. And again, these are little things that, you know, nuggets, little things that won't get you killed, but it will get you to safety, that we can tell folks in the churches. Because I thank God that I've been able to, again, by women that I know have invited me to come to their churches and talk about this, because that's one thing that I am just adamant about. We need to start with our churches, because that's where a lot of things originated from, even back to slavery. Our churches were there, even though we couldn't read and write, we knew, because it was ingrained in us then. So
and that's where most of the women are in church. Okay.
That's right.
And lots of men are not in there with them.
That's right. And the one thing that I want to share with all of us that's on here as women, when you see a sister crying, go to her. Okay? Don't try and, get in her business. Like Adrian, at the last slide, we hear you. We love you. If you need somebody to talk to, sometimes they just need somebody to listen. They don't need you to tell them what to do. They just need somebody to listen because they may not have somebody. They can't even talk to their mother about what's going on. I found out years later that my best friend was in a domestic violence situation. I didn't know. I thought I had done something to her, but she couldn't talk to me because every time I talked to her, her husband was there and wouldn't let her talk. So we have to stop being so judgmental. Oh yeah, she just thinks she this, and she thinks she that. No, you don't know. That's why I was talking about that mask. We all wear that mask and we still wearing those masks. So we have to be considerate, respectful, because that could be you. And I always say to people, you don't know if my husband is not beating me. You only see what you want to see. So if a sister comes to you and she has something that's pressing on her heart, listen.
Yeah. Excellent.
And you have to be careful who you tell.
We have a
I
couple
have,
questions in the chat.
something-
Oh, go ahead.
I have something that I would like to share with you. And this goes back a lot of years ago. I went to a presentation by this group called Turning Lives Around. And they gave us these little, I don't know if you can see them, lipstick.
Yes.
Lipstick tubes. And I still have it. And inside, there's a sheet of paper with information, contact information. And they said they used this because in cases where there's domestic violence or where the man is going through your things, won't let you take anything, they won't bother your lipstick tube. They they'll take your money, they'll take your wallet, but they'll let you keep your lipstick.
And you see
But inside this thing is coiled up a piece of paper. I don't know if you can see it.
Can you see mine?
Your camera's not on, Betty. Your camera's not on, Betty.
Camera isn't on.
Here you
But we
are.
can see Hilda. Hilda has it.
And
Oh,
here
yes.
it is.
Yes.
It's a long sheet of paper,
Yeah.
and it's narrow. It's not that wide. And you roll it up and put it inside of an empty lipstick tube. And you keep that in your pocketbook, and nobody would suspect what it was.
Right.
So and I still have it. This was
Yes.
way long ago.
Cooper River Hospital used to give these out to all the victims that came into the hospital for domestic violence. And I've been online trying to find some to give these out because people, and that's the other thing. You can't tell it, like somebody put in there, you can't tell your friends everything. You have to be careful who you choose as a friend. And Cooper River was giving these out in to all the women that came in there with the domestic violence situations. Yep. Tube of lipstick. So if any woman ever hands you a tube of lipstick,
Take it.
okay, she's letting you know that she needs help. And also, if you see somebody raise their hand like this, they're letting you know they're in a domestic violence situation. Just like that black circle, if you see that, that means that they're in a domestic violence situation. They're asking you for help.
Okay.
Adrian, I don't know if you can see the questions in the chat or not. Were you answering the questions as they came up, or?
We can. I'll share my screen again too. And so I had this particular slide up in hopes that you all could see just some of the things that you can do, like to advocate for folks. I do Usually I have a slide that talks about like what to do and what the signs of domestic violence are. And I have not, I didn't put that in this one, unfortunately, but I'm more than happy to send those resources out. Um, Especially like safety planning information as well. You know, what to do when folks have children. I know that question was in there. And so that's a resource that I'm willing to share. Of course, you can always have us back if you want like a longer presentation or workshop. There's so many more of us. So we're two represented, but we come as like 50, 60 deep. So, you know, we would love to continue to have this conversation with you because, again, we're just scratching the surface. So this empowerment wheel is something that, you know, we think is helpful, right? Respecting confidentiality, believing and validating a person's experience, acknowledging injustice, respecting a person's autonomy. And that's actually like my last slide, right? Like remembering that people who are victims and survivors, I use the term interchangeably. It's really up to the person how they wish to identify. Not everyone wants to be seen as a victim. Not everyone wants to, not everyone views themselves as a survivor. Sometimes people don't identify as either. But remembering that people are already doing the best that they can in their situation and are the experts on their own lives. And so we just want to empower them to make decisions about what is best for them. So we may not agree. We may think something else is best, but ultimately, like we have to support people and meet folks where they are, as not to cause further harm. So there are services available in every county. Most counties have a 24-hour hotline. There's at least one domestic violence shelter in every county. Case management services are provided. Outreach centers provide counseling and other forms of advocacy. PALS program for children, which is a creative arts therapy. They have both of those programs in Ocean County and also Monmouth County. So PALS is in Ocean County, and I believe it's called Amanda's Easel in Monmouth County at 180 Turning Lives Around. Legal advocacy, so court accompaniment. Most programs do not have attorneys on staff. There are a few organizations that do. But usually it's just someone that goes to court with the survivor to provide support. Domestic violence response team. That's a way that you can get involved as well. Volunteer for your local domestic violence response team so that you can respond to call out. So, you know, if the police are called, you can be a support for a survivor, and there's 40-hour training that is provided to you before you volunteer. So that's a way to get involved and support as well. And lastly, some programs do provide batterer's intervention, which is support for the person that's causing harm. We use she and woman because we know that domestic violence impacts women more. But we don't want to, I guess, slight any males who have experienced violence, and then also acknowledging the experience of those who are part of the LGBTQIA plus community, who domestic violence for them, they can experience it at disproportionate rates as well within their community, especially trans Black women. So I know that that can be a controversial topic, and you know we wrestle with that amongst ourselves. But just acknowledging that trans Black women are also being killed at horrific rates. I think in Philadelphia, maybe last week, I think a trans woman was found murdered. So I just wanted to lift that up as well.
And also victims of crime compensation, and they have one in each county. You can go there if you need assistance with different things. They do have some resources available as well.
Thank you all very much.
You're welcome. So
Could you send us this information, Adrienne, in terms of the contact? Thank you.
Yep. So culturally specific resources. So these are the folks that look like us. Haram-based social services, CARC. I know that they CARC is in Asbury Park and helps the the Latino community, but hey, like they show us love too. So reach out to CARC, and I will send you this information with all of these resources within your community and statewide. Thank y'all so much for having us.
One last question. Is the PowerPoint available? Someone asked in the chat.
Sure.
If you can send that to me as well, I'll make sure I distribute that as well.
Okay.
So this was a great presentation. This was amazing. I know Madam President and I attended one back in May, and that's how we connected with you ladies in the first place. And this was probably better than that one. So thank you so much.
Definitely was. Definitely was.
Being here tonight. Madam President, any other thoughts?
Just saying thank you for partnering with the Central Jersey Club on this impactful and dynamic presentation. And I hope that we continue this partnership and get this message out. And like you said, this was just scratching the surface. I think that we can do so much more. So I hope we can continue this partnership. Thank you.
And we'd also like to invite you to come to our Women of Color Task Force meeting. We have them the first Friday in every month. And then you can meet some more of your sisters, and we can assist in any way that we can.
Great.
Yeah, I've attended a couple meetings. They're very
Thank you.
informative.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, ladies. Have a great evening.
Thank you
Good
for
evening.
having us.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was very, very informative.
Keisha?
Thank you.